These are the harmonizing sounds of one of my new favorite animals, the New Guinea Highland Wild Dog. They are also called, believe it or not, singing dogs. I am Marcia Civic, and this is Bee Provided Conservation Radio. New Guinea Highland wild dogs are one of the oldest known canids and were thought to be extinct in the wild until recently, when in the late 1990s, ecologist I. Lair Brisbane helped fund James McIntyre to travel to the highlands of New Guinea to seek out these mythical creatures.
2 years ago, I was working for a science news website called Earth.com, and they kind of gave me quite a bit of free reign to write about what I wanted to, which was nice. And I'd had my kind of like spreadsheet of ideas, and I'd come across a few years before just a kind of small reference to these New Guinea Highland wild dogs, and I was like, oh well, this could be an opportunity to just kind of like dig in and see what kind of information is out there on them.
This is Richard Pallardy, a freelance science writer. He uses his talents to write about living things, bringing attention to their behaviors and their importance to our lives and our world. Richard recently published an article in an online publication called Hidden Compass titled No Dog is an Island, and it is about these New Guinea singing dogs.
Hidden Compass is a pretty new publication. I think that they categorize themselves sort of as like adventure travel writing, but so there usually is kind of the pieces are kind of undergirded by some science or even some sociology. People go to these strange places or talk to people that have been to these strange places and kind of use what they call like very cinematic writing to tell the reader about it. So some of it's first person, some of it's, in my case, I've interviewed this gentleman, James McIntyre, who actually went to New Guinea to search for these dogs. And they're kind of doing some pretty interesting stuff in terms of how they're supporting their writers. So once you land a pitch there, they'll work with you on the article and writers get a flat fee. But then once the article goes live, we do a lot of promotion, and there's a crowdfunding campaign attached to the article. So readers who enjoy the piece and want to support the work of whichever writer that they like on the site and the site itself, once the crowdfunding campaign closes, that those funds are split between the writer and the publication. So it's kind of a neat and unique way of supporting writers. As far as we know, they're the first ones who have done it in that specific way. I think there obviously are other crowdfunding type platforms that writers can use, but this very like targeted campaign is pretty unique.
So I just wanted to add a quick note that Hidden Compass can be found at hiddencompass.net, and you'll be able to find Richard's article, No Dog is an Island, on that website. And I'm curious also, Richard, how you and James McIntyre connected.
James McIntyre, actually reached out to me because I don't know if he had like a Google alert set up or something, or was just kind of scanning the web for material on these dogs, had come across it. And so he reached out to me and said that he was really happy with the article because it kind of like, I don't know, clarified a few things and busted some myths or cleared up some misunderstandings about what we knew about these dogs. So he was pleased with that. And he actually runs the New Guinea Highland Wild Dog Foundation, which is the organization that had that clip that we listened to at the beginning. And he is the preeminent researcher on these dogs, and as far as we know, is probably like the only guy that's really concentrating on them. So he's been over to New Guinea 3 times now. And the last time he was over there in 2018, actually was able to trap them and take samples. So he's kind of the only guy that's really working on this.
Even though these dogs are one of the oldest known canids, they still are somewhat of a mystery, right? And not fully understood?
So they are something of a mystery, although some of this year, a couple of papers have come out that have kind of clarified some of this. But so what we suspect about these dogs is that at some point, maybe 11,000 years ago at the longest, it could be more, they migrated out of South China into New Guinea. Now, what's interesting is that we don't actually know how that happened. There is some speculation that they initially came with people because there's like it's kind of like an island chain that connects the two. So if they had come by themselves, it's quite possible that they would have had to swim, which could have happened. But people think it's more likely that they came over in boats with early people that colonized New Guinea.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thing is, whether or not that happened or they came over by themselves, they did establish a free-ranging wild population up in the mountains in New Guinea. I mean, these are incredibly steep mountains. The peak under that was sort of above McIntyre's base camp when he was over there
Mm-hmm.
is like the highest island peak in the world. So, I mean, it's gigantic. This is very like steep, remote terrain, but they have just adapted perfectly to this very harsh environment. I mean, it's an alpine environment, so it's even, in the summer, it's pretty chilly. It rains almost every day, very cloudy. But there are animals up there for them to eat. There are tree kangaroos and other marsupials. There are birds. And from what we can tell, they're doing very well up there. They all look very healthy and seem perfectly adapted to the environment.
Being a little naive, I always thought wolves were the oldest canids. So, how do the New Guinea Highland wild dogs compare?
A couple other candidates, but they're definitely up there. So a paper came out late last year that kind of using genetic analysis drilled down to find sort of like the basal canines, and their New Guinea Highland wild dog was one of 5 dogs that are considered sort of like the base of all domestic dogs. So they're an interesting way to look at it is like they're sort of what dogs probably looked like when they were first domesticated by humans. So they bear some similarities, for example, to pariah dogs in India, which are like the sort of dogs that live on like the outskirts of town and feed on garbage and scavenge, and they're almost in kind of an intermediate state between domestication and wildness. So
Yeah.
we think that actually dogs and contemporary wolves derived from the same species. So, dogs came from wolves almost certainly, but they didn't come from the wolves that we now know as like the gray wolf, up in the wilds of Canada or Alaska. They were those wolves actually came from the same animal that our dogs came from.
What about the dingo in Australia? They look very similar to these wild dogs. Are they related at all?
Well,
Actually, yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's almost certain that they are.
Oh, okay.
Um, so the interesting thing is that New Guinea actually used to be connected to Australia by a land bridge,
Mm.
and that was many thousands of years ago, like I think over 10,000 years ago. And it's believed that the singing dogs migrated over that land bridge, and then they later adapted to the conditions of Australia and became the dingo. Because, like you said, they look very similar.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you put a Highland wild dog and a dingo next to each other, you'd have to be something of an expert to be able to tell the difference between them. The dingo is, I would say, a little like more slender and lankier, a little bit taller, but the patterning on the fur, like the formation of the face and like the high, like pointy, foxy ears, all looks the same. And they did do genetic analysis, and there's only a kind of a small section of DNA that differentiates them.
That's
So
amazing.
they are there's kind of a continuum.
These dogs have been domesticated, right, to some degree. I can see the draw to them. They are certainly beautiful and strong and athletic. But before someone gets serious about having one as a companion, I mean, is that something that would be recommended? I know that they can squirm out of really tight spaces and turn their heads almost like owls.
And that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So if they're trained properly, they can be decent companion animals, but they really have some very, very specific needs. They need a lot of space outside, and they need a fenced off area that is like really like, I mean, I think I've read that it needs to be like a 12 or 14-foot fence, so they won't be able to scale it because the other strange thing about them is that they can climb. They can climb
Yeah.
trees.
They kind of
Um,
reminded me of the gray fox in that way that they can climb
yeah,
trees.
exactly. Like
So,
that, and if you're if if a person was to have them with another type of animal, either a regular domestic dog or a cat, they would really need to be raised with them from being a puppy, because they just interact differently. Like their body language and their kind of like dominance hierarchy is a bit different than it is for other domestic dogs. So that can kind of lead to conflict unless they're, supervised from a very early age. And they also have a very high prey drive. So if, you have something like a rabbit or a cat, they will view that as prey. So
Yeah.
you really have to be careful and teach them that that's not the case when they're very little. Otherwise, disaster could strike. And they also have no recall, meaning so if they get off the leash and take off,
they're gone.
It doesn't matter how well they're trained, they're gone.
Yeah.
And people have said they may come back on their own. Like it's not like they're running away from you exactly. They just don't register that command like a regular domestic dog would.
So is it true that there are about 200 of these dogs in captivity? Some of the larger zoos had singing dogs, but decades ago they started to get rid of them, I believe, by passing them on to private zoos or breeders, or just stop breeding them, correct?
From what we know, there are a couple of zoo registries that keep track of them. The interesting thing is that a couple decades ago, some of the larger zoos that had them started getting rid of them, because at the time it was believed that they really didn't have any like significance in a conservation sense. They were almost thought to be just kind of like feral dogs, which in a sense they sort of are, but in a very significant way. So a lot of these larger zoos started to get rid of them. Like either they just wouldn't breed them, and so when their animals died, they just never got new ones, or they would give them to other zoos. I actually saw them about 10 years ago at San Diego Zoo.
I didn't realize they had them.
And so I got to hear them howling like in person, which was really cool. But I talked to the keeper that worked with them over at San Diego. Like the offspring of their last pair are now at a small zoo in Palm Springs, and they don't have any anymore. Oh. But some of these zoos actually gave them to private owners. And so there are a couple of people that still breed them. The thing is, the original population of captivity, they're more often referred to as singing dogs rather than Highland dogs. Mm-hmm. The original population, there was about 8 animals. So the population in captivity is very inbred.
Genetic.
That's another reason that they want to. They were McIntyre was supposed to return to West Papua, which is the Indonesian side of New Guinea, this year. But of course, with the virus, he wasn't able to travel. But they were going to collect genetic material to kind of put some new blood into the captive population, because they're starting to see, I wouldn't say quite deformities, but the population is kind of weakening because of that inbreeding.
Oh, that's too bad. So do they breed with other dogs, or it just hasn't been successful? Or
I think they can. Yeah. Because the one study that McIntyre was a part of earlier this year did find that there was a very small amount of just regular domestic dog DNA. Mm-hmm. And we do know that dingoes can crossbreed with dogs, and that's actually a conservation issue in Australia, because these feral dogs will breed with the dingoes, and they're kind of worried that that will impact the population, and that there will be no more pure dingoes left.
I'm curious, since they live in very remote territory, the highlands are very difficult for people to get to. Is it known what challenges these dogs are facing for survival in the wild?
So the interesting thing is that territory and up in those mountainous regions of New Guinea is so remote that very few people, particularly very few Westerners, ever go up there. So we don't have an accurate estimation of their population at the current time. We would have to do greater surveys. I know the population that McIntyre studied seems to be pretty healthy, and they did find another population nearby, but the actual extent of their population in the wild is something of a mystery. And in 2019, the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is kind of like the international arbitrating body deciding which animals go on like the endangered species list or listed as threatened or as stable, delisted the Highland wild dog and the dingo, which had been noted like as species of concern because for the same reason that zoos were getting rid of them at the time, we just didn't have the genetic information that said, these were actually a very distinct primitive population of dogs. So that rug kind of got pulled out from under them, and it makes it harder to get funding to study them. Right. There's no basis for establishing even kind of conservation framework because of that. So it'll be interesting to see in light of this new genetic information how they adjust that. Because they do have a dingo working group now, so I think they are kind of reconsidering how to do that, and hopefully that will give some people some motivation to actually study them and get out there and actually give us an accurate estimation of their population.
Well, I think it's really important that you bringing this story to the world, because I love learning about new animals that I really haven't known, and I think it's great to bring attention and the work that you're doing. I think it's wonderful that you bring attention to this and kind of help us understand what's going on so we can help in a way. And
exactly, that's my goal, and thank you for doing the same. It's so fascinating that often we think of new species being discovered at this point as being something really tiny that escaped our notice, but I mean these are pretty sizable animals and we just know nothing about them. It's kind of humbling to know that we really haven't explored every corner of the earth and don't know about every life form that's on it. It kind of gets you to think no, maybe there's something else out there too.
That is interesting. I love that. And are you working? Can you tell us if you're working on anything else right now, or what do you have going on in the future?
So I do have another piece on the wild dogs coming out hopefully within the next month. It's a publication called Earth Island Journal, and this one gets a little bit more into the conservation aspects of the dogs and what we do know about them and what we still need to find out about them. And then I'm working on an article that's a little bit different. It's not quite a conservation issue, but it's kind of an animal welfare issue. When I just started on this piece this week, and I noticed on YouTube there was this phenomenon of videos where people were feeding live animals their pets, at which, I mean, in some ways it's sort of an ethically complicated discussion because if you're keeping something like a snake or a predatory fish, like they do need like animal protein to survive, but at the same time is it kind of unethical to use that as kind of like a form of entertainment or a spectacle? Right. And I mean there are thousands of these videos. It's very strange that people just kind of latched onto that as something. It's almost like a mini like gladiator fight or something. I thought that was such a strange phenomenon. So I'm going to be talking to some of the people that actually put up these videos. I'm talking to an animal ethicist on Monday.
Oh, great! I would
see what her perspective on that is, and if she thinks that's kosher or if she doesn't. And I'm also talking to people at YouTube about how like their algorithm affects that, because I was listening to some of these creators and they were saying that when they put out these videos, it really boosts their views. So there's something in the sort of in the coding that is like.
Well, thank you for doing that. That's a tough topic. I'm not sure I would be able to handle it. But I also wanted to ask, if you can remind our listeners how they can find you and your work that you're doing.
My writing is out there all over the place. I do have a website, richardpallardy.com, and I'm on all the socials on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and all that. So love to hear from other people that are interested in animals and the natural world and conservation. So anyone out there, please definitely drop me a line. I always love to talk to new people that are interested in those topics.
Thank you so much for meeting with us today. I do have one more question I always ask. Some people like it, some people don't. But what gives you hope with things going on? It's been difficult to find positive things, in our lives with the pandemic and such. But
right, that's such a good question. I think Probably one of the things that gives me the most hope is just human ingenuity, or the fact that people can still come up with really like novel, sophisticated solutions to these problems that are affecting us. Whether it I mean, as frustrating, for example, as the vaccine rollout has been, and how slow and inefficient it is, it's still like pretty amazing that we were able, humans were able to come up with this vaccine in like in a year, for example. Like,
Right.
so as easy it is to kind of lose sight of that sort of thing, I try to look back to that and say, okay, well, there there's something in humanity and human intelligence that is you know capable of helping us out of even really dire situations, and hopefully that kind of ingenuity can be applied to the other residents of the planet, animals and plants and the environments that they inhabit, which I think in some ways that is happening. I was reading this week that they were coming up, I forget what country it was in Africa, they were coming up with an idea for funding lion conservation using carbon credits. So they essentially like switched the fire season in these reserves that lions inhabited. And because they did that, the season that they were actually creating the fires put off less carbon, so they were actually able to get money for that as part of like these international like carbon trading agreements, and then put that money towards conserving lions. I was like, oh, what a like remarkably like original way of going about helping them. I would never have thought to do that.
That's terrific. I haven't heard of that either, so that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Richard.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and we'll get this out and share your information. So it's a pleasure to talk to you. So
that was a great conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. And if you would like more information, please visit our website at beprovided.com. And I am Marcia Civic with Be Provided Conservation Radio. Also on the website, you will find show notes and links to Richard Pallardy's website and to Hidden Compass, where you can find his article, No Dog is an Island. So please check those out. It is worth reading, and there are some other amazing authors on Hidden Compass as well. And just share this information with your friends if you like what you hear, so we can get the story of these beautiful animals out to the world. Stay safe and stay healthy, and have a good day.